Welcome to another Parenting and Mental Health brought to you by Bake Community Health. I'm Dr. Court, and we're going to talk about trust tonight. So it's important to remember back in our own childhood who we trusted. If children fear you, they don't really trust you, right? They might have data that indicates what's going to happen to them if they do the wrong thing, but in reality, they don't really trust you. They don't trust you, they can't learn from you. And ultimately, as a parent, our goal is to teach our kids so many different things. So we need to make sure that they trust us. So what is trust? Well, trust might mean a little something different to different people, but overall, there are some basic concepts that are a little universal with trust. One is people need to feel safe around you in order to trust you. And that goes back to that fear thing, right? So trust means you can rely on someone else because you feel safe around them and you have confidence that they won't hurt or violate any of your boundaries. Trust is an absolute foundation in any relationship. And it's super important because if you have it, you can be vulnerable and authentic with the people that you trust, which ultimately is going to make you healthier both mentally and physically. So let's take a minute to think about a time when you had a really good, trusted teacher, coach, boss, community leader, family member. What characteristics do they have? I want you to take a minute and write them down. Once you're done writing them down, I want you to ask the question, how many of these characteristics do you possess? So if you need to pause the video so you have time to write them down and think about this, go ahead. Okay, so now that you have an idea of the characteristics that you felt people possessed that you trusted and how many of those characteristics you possess, I'm going to start to help you understand how to build trust. And we're going to first describe how trust is viewed in the corporate world for two reasons. One, corporate leadership has been studied thoroughly and is constantly updated. And the second reason is because I'm talking to you all as parents, and you're likely to relate to a past leader that you trusted, and also you are a leader in your home. So it's helpful to look at these characteristics. In the corporate world, trust isn't a given the way we assume trust is between a parent and a child. However, then as a parent, the effort has to be conscious and deliberate to continue to keep trust. So, these are the key characteristics that we found from corporate leadership research from well-known names such as Stephen Covey, Jim Collins, Peter Drucker, Ken Blanchard, and Tony Robbins all agree on these similar characteristics of a trusted leader. The first is commitment. A committed leader is someone who is loyal to the cause, the vision, and the team. They persevere despite setbacks. When a leader is committed, they will build trust of those around them by staying present, engaged, and positive. Present, engaged, and positive. Commitment is the number one thing a leader can demonstrate to build trust going forward, more important than anything else. So being present, engaged, and positive. Think about that and think about your own parenting experience. How often are you present, completely present in the moment with your child, engaged with what they're doing or saying, and using a positive story using a positive outlook. I can tell you there's more than one time for me where my child's been talking to me and I was not fully present for them and I was not fully engaged. And it happens to the best of us. And more than likely, even though they might not say it or show it, they do notice that you're not fully engaged. And think about how frustrated we get when either people that are friends, family members, other people we interact with, including our kids, are not present and engaged when we're speaking to them. So when the shoe's on the other foot, make sure that you're present, engaged, and positive. I'm going to jump around with these a little bit. The next one I want to talk about is connection, because it's really closely tied to being present and engaged. Being connected to those who look up to you is really important. You want to resist the temptation of getting bogged down in the day-to-day activities and that take us away from being connected to those that trust us and those we care about. You want to make sure that you don't become overly distant or detached from our children, or if we're talking about a leader, you don't become overly distant or detached from those that you lead. You want to make sure that you take time, and often when I'm working with couples, I tell the couple to schedule time to connect because the day-to-day does happen. Life happens. There's tons of stuff that comes up for all of us. And in the US culture, for better or for worse, being busy is valued. So that busyness sometimes can take over. So as part of your busy day, put a block in to connect with your children, even if it's for 5 minutes, or it's just little things like stopping and telling them that you're proud of them and giving them a big hug. Those moments they'll remember and they feel. A trusted person is somebody who cares about others and what they value. Again, this is a big one, especially for slightly older kids. When they start to have values of their own, hearing why they value it and allowing them to have their own values is really, really important. They're going to trust you more if you allow them to have their own values as opposed to trying imposing your values onto them. So in order to do that, you have to have another key characteristic of trust, which is compassion. A trustworthy leader gets to know each individual employee. Trustworthy parent doesn't assume they know their child. They constantly try to reconnect and get to know them. They listen to them, going back to that being engaged, right? They hear their concerns and they hear them in a way that they are not being overly judgmental. As parents, it's really hard not to be judgmental. And it's important to try to taper being judgmental. Allowing your kid to express it from their point of view, trying to put yourself in their point of view. Excuse me. And then trying to help them and be compassionate for what they're experiencing. One thing I notice is I have, with kids, they're short, they can't reach things. Simple things like that, we sometimes take for granted. So I've moved things in my kitchen, like plastic cups and things like that, that I know my children can get to, and I put them in the lower cabinets because I know they can get to it. So as you know, when kids are really small, we're so good about moving all the dangerous stuff out of range of our kids, but we forget to put the things that they want or need where they can reach it so they can be independent. So having some compassion, also having compassion for when kids make mistakes, or having compassion for the kid that doesn't want to go to practice or doesn't feel like doing their homework. Sit down and listen to them. Why don't they want to do it? And instead of just saying, well, you've just got to do it, try and think through a good reason why they should do it. And if you can't, maybe you want to reconsider that activity. With homework, that's a given. There's so many ways to connect homework to the greater good. You're talking about why kids go to school. They are learning to be good citizens. They're learning skills that they're going to need to get a job, to make money. They're learning skills in how to interact with other people, both ones they like and get along with and ones they don't. Those are all really important life skills, and that you can talk to your kids about. So when you're committed, you're being committed, you're compassionate, and you're connecting, you have to do all of this consistently. If you're only compassionate, once a month, that's not very trustworthy. And think about this. If you have people that work for you, think about your go-to employees. They're the ones that day in and day out always do what they say they're going to do. If you can't do what you say you're going to do, if you have to break a promise with your child, then acknowledge that, right? If you told them, hey, we're going to go to the playground after we finish this chore, and then you can't do it because something comes up, acknowledge that that's a broken promise. Explain to them why this other thing's more important and mend the broken promise. If you do that and you talk to them about how you're going to be more consistent, then that is going to show consistency more than anything else. So being consistent is really important. This is really important for rules. Don't bend on your rules often unless there's a really good reason. That also means that the rules that you need to keep consistent, really think through what has to be a rule. In our house, safety. It's safety first, right? So the safety rules are absolutely have to happen. Something towards health, right? So that's why brushing teeth and washing hands are an absolute. I don't let them get away with that because that's something that is going to help them stay healthy. Other rules we think about, you know, and we talk through it. And when I say we, my husband and I talk through it first before we talk through it with our kids. And if we don't think we fully trust our kids to honor that commitment yet, then let them fail safely and be consistent with how you let them fail, right? It doesn't always mean punishing them when they don't do what they're supposed to do. Maybe it means you consistently sit down with them. And my favorite comment to ask other people is, I noticed that you couldn't do this, or you weren't able to get this done, or you didn't listen to me. How can I help you do this better? That's showing support and compassion, and it's showing that you want them to be more consistent, and it holds you accountable to being more consistent, all which are going to build greater trust. The last competency is more related to being a corporate leader, right? You're going to build more trust in your employees or your coworkers or anyone if they see that you have the skills to do the job that you're in. I left it in here because as a parent, it's really important to be competent as well. I put that in there because so if we are a parent that struggles with addiction or health, mental or physical challenges, that may hinder our ability to be fully competent as a parent. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And if you can't be a fully competent parent, then you need to look for ways to help you be competent. Use myself as an example. My husband travels a lot. It's really hard, as many of you know, to be a single parent, especially a single parent that works full time, has other commitments, and is trying to have my own work-life parent balance, right? So I often seek help and ask for help when I know my competency is going to be hindered or impaired. It's hard to ask for help, but remember, when you ask for help, you're actually telling somebody else that you trust them and you're giving them an opportunity to do something kind for you. So there's a lot of value in asking for help. It doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. In fact, quite the opposite. It means that you know and you're strong enough to know where your gaps are to ask for help, which makes you even a stronger person. The last C is communication. So, and there are 3 categories under this. And all of these, communication is littered throughout every single one of these other core characteristics. We have to be good communicators. When I'm working with parents and a kid that is struggling with a mental health challenge, I talk to parents about naming emotions, talking out loud, talking through your decision-making process out loud. Because if you do that, you're teaching your child, one, how to make decisions, and two, how to express themselves. And they see and can better understand how you're getting to a decision you're making. Communication is key. And if you don't feel like you're getting through to your children, if you don't feel like the communication is good, well, look at it. Be uh, the detective in your own life and figure out whether or not your communication is clear, if it's concise, if it's coherent. So, coherent, can other people understand it? I had this happen on the sports field the other day. I was trying to explain how to do a skill to one of the players, and I explained it, and I realized I wasn't really clear on how to explain it. And so the way I explained it wasn't very clear. And I stopped and I looked at the player and I said, "Did that make sense to you, or did I just confuse you more?" And luckily, the player trusted me enough to be honest. And they said, "I'm more confused now." And I said, "Okay." And the first thing I said was, "Thank you for being honest." And I took a moment and I re-explained it until I felt like the player got it. This is a really important thing to do with your kids too. There are a lot of quick ways or little ways that you can ensure that communication happens. One, use multiple communication methods. Write things down, tell them, and maybe add a third communication method. If you have Echo Dots in your house, you can add reminders that the Alexa or Echo function will say in your house or pop up on a phone. So using multiple communication methods kind of ensure that one way or the other it hopefully gets through. After you explain what you needed to explain or communicate, ask your child to tell you back, summarize what they just heard. This is a great way to find out whether they understood or were listening. And if they can't tell you, take a breath, because sometimes they just don't comprehend things through an auditory method. Say, "Okay, so you didn't quite get it. That wasn't what I was trying to say. How can I help you better understand? Do you need," and give them options. Do I need to write it down? Do we, whatever, problem solve with them. So that's a really two quick ways that you can ask. Ask for understanding, ask them to summarize what you said, or ask them what that means, whatever you communicated to them, what does that mean to them? You might have been communicating a rule, and what that means is, oh, if I break this rule, I lose this privilege, or, you know, I need to make sure I don't break this rule, or I need to make sure I do this thing, right? Ask them what it means to them. So I asked how this applies to a parent, and I tried to do that actually while I was going through the characteristics. That said, I'm going to go through it again, right? Remember, communicate multiple ways. So I went over a lot of stuff and I talked a lot. Now I'm going to show you a few slides that help you know how to apply these trusted characteristics as a parent. First, we want to build emotional trust. When our kids are young, emotions, both theirs and ours, can be really big. Sometimes these big emotions can be disruptive or even obstructive, right? Parents tend to feel stressed about juggling many tasks against pressure of time, right? So when our children throw tantrums or don't do what we ask of them, we usually don't have the time to deal with these emotions. And we have an inclination to move past them or to bribe them, using like technology or whatever, right? Just to get the unwanted behavior to stop. But in order to help our kids change their behavior and to really understand what's going on, we need to help our kids with building trust in themselves. We must teach them about their emotions, which means first naming them, or saying like, "You seem really irritated, you seem really angry." It seems silly to say that out loud, but remember, these are words that aren't necessarily taught in school, as evidenced by so many people that end up in my office as adults. they can list maybe 6 or 7 emotion words at first, right? And then I give them this huge wheel of so many more emotions, and then they're like, "Oh, you know what? I wasn't just sad. I was really lonely." Right? That's different. It still has a sadness to it, but it's different, and that helps you pinpoint what's going on. So we gotta teach them about emotions. We have to help them in understanding how our emotions create a story and a message, that our emotions are our body's way of communicating with us. And so we first want to acknowledge the emotion, right? See that you're very frustrated with your sister. Great way to acknowledge it, right? Then you label the emotion, right? You labeled frustration. The kid might say, I'm not frustrated with her, I'm angry, right? Okay, you're angry. Then you want to you validate it, say, okay, yeah, I can see that, yeah, that does seem to be like anger. Okay. So help them label it, help them expand to a more specific word, right? From sad to lonely, from frustrated to angry. Okay. You can even ask them. If you don't want to say you look like this, you can say, well, or if they say, no, I'm not that. Okay. Well, how would you describe your emotions right now? Right? Help them to label it. Then by doing these, you validate their emotion, you label it, you acknowledge it. The neuroscience behind this is that when you do that, you give your child the space to take those emotional feelings out of an unconscious part of our brain, a more reactive part of our brain, and we put it into our conscious space. And by doing that, we're creating skills that allow our children to regulate the emotion. They're still going to feel emotions, and I always make this distinction with people in my office. You can't really control your emotions. You're in other words, you're going to feel what you're going to feel. And all of those emotions are okay, right? It's just our body's way of communicating with us. What we can control is how we react to our emotion. So we feel angry. That is anger often comes from part of the brain called the amygdala, which is an unconscious part of the brain. It's an older part of the brain that all animals have, or most animals have, right? And it is very tied to amygdala is swelled and enlarged during the teenage years, which explains why teenagers can have such a wide range of emotions. Um, and it's trying to tell us something. Our emotions are a call to action. Okay. So if we acknowledge, label, and validate the emotion, we're giving our kids a chance to process it and then use our conscious part of the brain, our cerebral cortex, to then go, oh, okay, when I get angry, I act like this, but then that ends up being a bad situation, right? Instead, I can do this thing. Okay. So, and that goes to the next thing we can do as a parent is once they have acknowledged, they can label their emotion, we want them to take responsibility for their behaviors and how to handle their emotions. So, for instance, at one point, a little girl at the pool bumped her knee against the wall as she was climbing out, right? She cried, but her dad didn't come to her rescue immediately. He let her cry as she continued to climb, all the while encouraging her to keep trying, right? She made it over to the wall. And at this point, she realizes that she can get herself out of the bad situation. She learns that she's capable of solving her own problems. In this instance, she's learning to trust herself, okay? So, what was the point of that story? Well, the dad didn't rush over and immediately tell the child what to do. Now, some cases, that's what we need to do, okay? Especially if the child is in a dangerous situation, right? We can immediately remove them from it. When it's good to kind of allow our children to walk through it on their own is first when we've already talked to them about emotions, we've already worked with them on emotions when they were calm and separately. It's just like what you do when, in a lot of extracurricular activities like dance or cheer or sports, or music, right? You practice, practice, practice before you perform, right? Before you have the game. And so when you're calm, you practice this stuff. I've played a game in the car where the kids and I try and name as many emotion words as we can. And then we go back around and we go, okay, when have we've named the emotion now. When have you had that emotion recently? And we describe the event. Yes, I understand I'm a therapist, so this is the type of stuff we do in our car, and it isn't necessarily something other families would do, but this is a really good way to teach your kids how to connect with their emotions. So then, when they're having a strong anger response, instead of telling them, the parent I was telling you about a few weeks ago, hey, calm down, that never works. You can say, hey, I can see that, right? Acknowledge emotion that you're frustrated, angry, whatever. What can you do to help calm yourself down? What works for you, right? And the kids can have answers. So if we help them find their own solutions, then they're learning to trust their own instincts, and that's really important, right? Because emotional responsibility is the idea that each one of us is responsible for how we feel and how we handle our feelings, right? So we own whatever we're feeling, and then we have a choice in how we react, how we handle those feelings. Best way to teach emotional responsibility is to teach by example. And again, talk out loud. When you're in a conflict with another person, allow your kids to see behind the scenes. Talk out loud. When you're having a conversation with a spouse or someone else in the household, say, wow, I'm really frustrated by what you just did. And have a conversation where you talk through it out loud and allow your kids to see how you deal with it. As we tune in more and we notice and observe ourselves in action, we will make better choices as well. And we're teaching our kids how to make better choices. We'll also start to recognize patterns that are both productive and aren't. As a family, you can talk about the counterproductive patterns. After you got angry with your sister, did hitting her, was that a productive pattern? No. What happened when I got in trouble? My sister started to cry, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay. What would be a productive pattern? You walk through that. Okay. What's going to help you make the productive pattern? And they might say, I don't know. And that's when you step in and say, okay, well, maybe we can do these things, right? Now, don't try and do all this while your kid's in a big emotional state. They won't hear you. You have to talk about these things when everything's calm, during dinner, on the weekends. This is when you talk about it. Might not be the most fun thing in the world to talk about, but that's when you want to talk about it. Okay. And as part of that, you brainstorm how they can take responsibility for their own emotions, right? Well, I could tell my sister that what she's doing is really irritating me and I want to hit her, but I'm not going to. Okay. That's better than actually hitting somebody. And that might tell your sister, wow, my sibling's really angry with me and I need to pay attention. Okay. Okay. What else can you do? I can use that, box breathing that you talk. Okay, cool. Right? So you can walk through it. You can even, again, going back to communication, you can put up different ideas around the house. Make sure you take a deep breath, right? Whatever it is. Okay. So as part of this, we want to make sure after we're teaching our kids all about emotions and they're getting it also from their school counselors at school, and that's a great way to connect too, asking them when the school counselor does their lessons, asking their kids to come home and talk about it with you and explain what they learned. Uh, the school counselors often have great lessons, and you'll be surprised at how much your kids remember and have learned. And if you can use the same language that the schools are using, that's going to be easier for everybody. Uh, Not unlike when your kid was little, if they went to preschool and they were potty training, you wanted to know what the teachers were doing at school so you could mimic it at home, because then the kids were able to transfer the skills. Same thing here. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're balancing this idea of trust with the expectations that you're setting, which means, first of all, you have to set really clear expectations in your household. So let me give you a story. One day, 17-year-old William asked his dad if he could go to the movies with some of his friends. His dad initially said no, but a couple hours later, William was told that he may go if he wanted, and it's his decision to make. William doesn't completely trust that it's his decision to make. And based on a couple past experiences, whenever he's been given a choice to make his own decision, there is usually a right answer and a wrong answer. The right answer is something Dad's happy with, the wrong answer is something that upsets his father. So sure enough, when William decides to go to the movies, because he was told it was his decision, his dad then later is, kind of cold and grumpy around him. When William asks what was going on, the dad says that he was disappointed with William's decision. Okay? This is an example of how to break trust with your kids. If you tell them it's your choice, you better be okay with the choice that they make. So sometimes we have to start with giving our kids multiple choice, right? So say, hey, we do this all the time with food. You can either have the carrots or the cucumbers, but you have to eat one of them. Kids might not love the two decisions, but they know either carrots or cucumbers will make mom and dad happy. Okay, now they know the expectation. Okay, so you have to be okay and make sure that if you give your children choice, that either choice is okay with you. Part of doing this is limiting their choices to things you're confident that they can make a good choice with. So in the case of William, if dad wasn't okay with him choosing to go to the movies, he shouldn't have allowed that to be an option. He could have said, you can't go to the movies, but you can have your friend come over to the house, or you can get online and play video games with your friends. Okay. Okay. Then that would be okay, right? As parents, we know that consequential thinking in kids, teens, is not fully developed yet. That's all in our prefrontal cortex, and that's still growing in our kids and teens. So we have to practice a little bit of compassion and empathy, back to our characteristics of a leader, to understand that thinking through consequences is not fully formed. And we might have to help them do that a little bit. And we can help them do that by still giving them choice, but structured choice. Okay. And we can also help them by, if they're making a choice about, whether to buy a car or whether to get a job, give them tools like pros and con lists or decision-making trees, right? If I decide to do this, then this is going to happen, right? Help them work through that. This is a practice in balancing boundaries with giving some freedom. And ultimately, if you do slowly give some freedom to your child, they are going to be more confident. They are going to trust themselves more, and they will trust you more. Okay. So that is another way to help build trust with your kids. Also, with balancing trust with expectations, you're going to have to help your kids navigate adversity when it comes up. There are going to be things that happen that we didn't anticipate, and they happen and they don't feel good. And sit down with them. And instead of saying, well, I would do this, talk to them about the situation and ask questions. Well, maybe your kid is experiencing a bully at school. Okay, so you say this kid's a bully. Have you talked to your teacher about it? What have you said to the kid directly? And remember, don't ask these in an accusatory way. Make sure you're super grounded when you're talking to your child about it, so that they feel safe to answer and they don't feel, like they're being interrogated or they're in trouble. Because that can happen quickly with kids, especially when they're talking about something that's uncomfortable. Okay. So talk to them about, like, okay, well, you know, maybe when you said that to this kid, that upset them, or have you noticed what triggers this kid, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe your child did something that wasn't very nice to a friend of theirs, and now their friend isn't talking to them and they feel badly about it. Talk them through the mistake they made, not in an accusatory or judgy way, but like, maybe give them a story yourself. There was this time where I said something really mean to a friend of mine. I felt so bad about it after, and I had to do X, Y, and Z. And then instead of telling them to do that, say, well, what could you do to help fix this problem, right? Again, asking them questions, letting them go on the journey with you, and they recognize that you're with them on the journey and beside them. You're not pulling them along. And then you can also break down the adversity into little tiny steps. Okay, well, what's something really small you can do now? Well, I could send my friend a text message and say, hey, I was a jerk today and I felt really bad about it. Okay, cool. Does that seem easy enough to? Yeah, okay. And then are you going to leave it at that? Well, then you might want to like follow up in person when you see your friend, right? Then you might want to have a conversation. So, like, you're giving them little small steps that they can build on. One of the best ways to deal with tricky waters of parents is to learn how to navigate our own emotions. So, this means grounding ourselves. And again, showing your kids in person and while it's happening what you do when you feel anxious or stressed out. You can even say, God, I'm really stressed out right now. And I know I need to do this. I don't feel like doing it, but I know I need to do it. Then your kids are going to end up encouraging you. And what will end up happening if you do this enough is when you're stressed out, your kids are going to start suggesting, hey, mommy, do you want to take the dog for a walk? And then you're going to be reminded, like, wow, I'm being a real jerk right now. Yes, honey, I'm going to take the dog for a walk. Or my son gives me hugs all the time when he sees I'm stressed. And it's an immediate reminder that I'm overtly stressed out and I am immediately calmed down because that love of my son and him just giving me a hug and noticing just warms my heart. So go back, label your own emotions, ground yourself, and model the behavior you want to see. I hope this was helpful to talk about trust and ways you can build it with your kids. It's easier said than done, but remember, if we go back to the basics of this, we just want to make sure that we're committed to being the best parents we can be, that we're compassionate about what our kids are going through, because it's different than what we went through in some ways, and it's the same in others. So just try and understand where your kid's coming from. Always try and connect with them. It's so important, even if it's for 30 seconds. That is going to help build trust. Be consistent about trying. And if you're not consistent for a little while, just do the next right thing, right? Try again the next day. This is true with anything in your life. And communicate, communicate, communicate. That's going to be so important. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. If you have any questions, you can always post them on our Facebook page. You can always call the office and ask questions. Or if you see me personally, like write stuff down, bring it in. And if you have topics, always happy to hear about new topics. Have a great night and be well.